But first, British car manufacturers are rationing the sale of petrol vehicles in order to avoid massive fines for missing government-imposed mandates for quotas on electric cars. Now, the British government has mandated 22% of all new car sales have to be electric vehicles, and that percentage ramps up every year until in 2030 it has to be 80% of new cars electric. And they're threatening manufacturers with £15,000 fines, that's about 30,000 Australian dollars, for every petrol vehicle sold outside the quota. The problem is not enough people want to buy electric vehicles. So have a listen to this admission by Robert Forrester. He's the chief executive of Virtue Motors in the UK. He told journalists in some franchises there's now a restriction on supply of of petrol cars and hybrid cars, which is actually where the demand is. It's almost as if we can't supply the cars people want, but we've got plenty of the cars that maybe they don't want. The manufacturers are trying to avoid the fines, so they're constraining the ability for us to supply petrol cars in order to try and keep to the government targets. Now, he went on to explain that if you walked into many car dealers today and said, hey, I've got the cash, I want to buy a car, they would not deliver that car to you until February next year. Not because the car's not ready, it's just that manufacturers are holding them back because they want to make sure they meet the quotas for electric vehicles and avoid fines. He goes on to explain the consequences of this. He said what the government's actually doing is constraining the new car market, which has a big impact on VAT receipts, that's tax income, and creates a business environment in the UK where manufacturers may question whether they want to make cars here at all. Well, Caleb, if only we had some sort of warning that, Soviet-style command economies... hang on a second. There was a Soviet Union where they tried this very thing and it failed. And what do they say? Those that don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And this is happening right across the Western world.
Indeed, and that the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I mean, it's a good day to be a used car salesman, isn't it? Because
prices will go right up.
Exactly. What this will do is inflate the used car market, because if you can't buy a new car that you want, well, your only other option is to go and buy a used car. And let's be honest, this is coming to a car dealership near you, because the Albanese government has its own targets for vehicles being sold in this country that are about to come into effect. And it's slightly different in that they're not going to fine companies for selling, too many petrol cars or not enough electric cars, but they have an overall tax system, basically, where, if they sell too many cars that put out too many emissions, then they have to pay a tax. And, of course, that tax then gets passed on to the consumer. But don't worry. Remember when all of this was touted and we were told by the government that it was going to happen? Casanova Bowen, told us nothing to worry about. There will be no restriction on cars whatsoever.
Car companies can continue to import any particular model they wish. No model will be mandatory, no model will be banned.
Sure, no model will be mandatory or banned by law, but the effect of the rules is that if the manufacturer wants to be able to sell cars at a reasonable price to consumers, they have to think about the sorts of cars that they are selling. And what we have seen, and I imagine it's exactly the same in the UK, is that the market for hybrid vehicles has gone through the roof. Yep. Consumers are not averse to buying vehicles that are better for the environment and ultimately better for their hip pockets, because if you're driving a hybrid vehicle, you spend far less on fuel because you're using half battery, half fuel, essentially. It's good as a driver, it's good for the environment. That is what the market has decided people want to buy. But the federal government here, just as the government in the UK, says, no, you must buy electric vehicles, except even though they're trying to force people to buy electric vehicles, they're still not buying electric vehicles. The whole thing is a sham.